All right, everyone, as the war in Ukraine drags on and on and on and on and on, and probably will for some time to come, you now have a pivot by the West in its messaging with regards to what Ukraine should do. And it's kind of a bipolar message because the other day, the United States, Blinken, I believe it was specifically, came out and said, well, the goal now is basically a defensive war. Ukraine shouldn't focus on retaking territory. It should focus on simply preventing the Russians from going further into Ukraine. But then today, you've got the suggestion that the United States should move nuclear systems into an RAF base in the UK, so closer to Russia, to point at Moscow, basically. And Moscow moved nukes into Belarus, so it's sort of, it's not really an antagonism, it's just upping the ante on the other side. So it's not necessarily doomsday, but we haven't had nukes in the UK in a while because it wasn't necessary. And it shouldn't have become necessary either. And then you've got the British command coming out and saying, well, we think that Ukraine should start being allowed to use Western weapons. So right now, the US, the UK, the other countries, we're sending weapons to Ukraine, but we're saying, okay, you can hit Russian targets on your soil, but we don't want you to fire our missiles and rockets and shit into Russia itself. If you want to hit Russian targets inside Russia, you have to use weapons sourced elsewhere. You have to use your own drones or whatever. Now they're suggesting that that could change and that we're going to start letting Ukraine bomb Russia itself with our weapons. That would be a pretty bad antagonism. And be sort of like if Russia started giving weapons to other countries and saying, go have fun. Go ahead, hit the Turks. Go ahead, fire them at Finland or something like that. Fire them in a NATO country. I don't think that would go over very well now, would it? No. I think there'd be more than a little bit of complaining about that. This plan is asinine. It's a terrible idea. Of course, it would be made in Britain. I don't think the U.S. command is optioning that yet, but we've seen stranger things. Biden's been all over the place with regards to his messaging on this. Of course, the U.S. is effectively war leader because NATO is directly involved despite Ukraine not being a NATO country. We've been pumping them full of weapons, but then recently said, okay, we're turning off the spigot. First it was, hey, your winter offensive, you'll take back all of your land. Maybe they'll push into Russia itself, and they gained a few square miles of land and basically stalled out. Now they're saying it's just a defensive war. Nobody's, therefore, on a day-to-day basis sure exactly what the goal is in Ukraine. Is it the restoration of land? Is it to grind Russia down and force negotiations when you end up with a stalemate? Is it to bomb Moscow? What exact purpose is being served? Meanwhile, the Ukrainian people suffer. It's kind of hard to grow your sunflower crop when there's 1,000 landmines that you have to plant around. And just saying that parts of Ukraine have been ruined for another generation or two, even if everyone were to withdraw and have peace right now. Even if they negotiated a final solution of peace today, for the next 100 years, you'd still be pulling up bombs and landmines and shit, and there'd be kids who got their legs blown off and draft animals vaporized, the horses dragging the plow along, and all of a sudden its head is gone in a red bloody cloud. How wonderful. It'll be just like some of the Southeast Asian countries where every once in a while an elephant limps out of the jungle with a leg missing, and they have to give it a prosthetic and hope for the best. The nuke plan is like, now you're just restoring nuclear systems that were there before, but under Trump they weren't there because there was no necessity. They had been removed, I think, before Trump got into office, and there was no reason to put them back. People thought, okay, things have simmered over there in Eastern Europe, and so there's no point to it anymore. Apparently, under Beijing Biden, it's become a necessity again. Yet another stark admission, by the way, of the failure of U.S. foreign policy under the current so-called administration. Link in the description. Archived, of course. When I saw it, I was like, nukes back in the UK, shit. And then I read further. And halfway down, it's like, oh yeah, by the way, the British are saying, well, we don't have a problem with sending missiles to Ukraine that they subsequently use on Russia at large. That would be effectively an act of war. You're giving somebody a weapon to use against what you perceive as a foe, as an intermediary, a proxy middleman. That's an act of war. What are you going to strike? I mean, if you strike an airbase or something in Russia, it's not going to do much anyway. You'd have to unleash a furious onslaught in order to degrade their air force enough to actually gain the upper hand anyway, and then the Russians would surely retaliate. They'll go on a huge push. They'll put another 100,000 troops on the border, and they'll just rampage through a couple of villages and slaughter everyone or something like that. Zelensky's got his, though. He's in his palace bunker, you know, the one with 13 bedrooms right now, so he doesn't really care about the suffering there. Nor does Putin really care about the Russian people's suffering. Russia's economy has been hit hard because of a massive amount of sanctions and embargoes on them. You've got the strangulation of shipping from the Black Sea. You've got the Bosphorus more or less closed to Russian-flagged vessels, and so it affects the Russian people too. Meanwhile, both sides are conscripting a bunch of old men and young boys to go and fight for them because, you know, at some point you start degrading as far as your manpower goes. At least all the troops now are battle-hardened by this point. Imagine you're out in a trench filled with rats and mice and surviving on MREs. Well, at least you only have to shit once every 3 days. I suppose as a saving grace it helps cut down the rodent population, maybe. I think this plan is nuts. The idea of allowing Western weapons to be used against Russia at large is a terrible, terrible idea. Again, if Russia were to engage in similar behavior, and sporadically through Iran it does, it draws condemnation on a significant scale, even by nations that are more neutral. They tend to condemn that sort of thing. Their shipping goes through the Red Sea and shit like that too, so Persian Gulf. It's a world economy. Plenty of nations that are more aligned with the East Bloc or have a hands-off, very neutral approach get pissed off when their tankers are hit by Houthi missiles as well. And that war is, at this point, inextricably linked to what's happening in Ukraine as well, with Russia and the United States and other players effectively playing a series of proxy wars, which is what's going on right now. And then you just had a scandal. Some UN workers, Israel accused them of working with Hamas on the during the invasion of Israel there by, you remember when Hamas sent the paragliders over? Apparently 12 UN workers have been implicated as partially responsible for that. 9 of them have been sacked. One's dead. Probably got his head blown off by an IDF soldier at some point. And the other 2, I guess, they haven't established exactly what their names are. They're trying to clarify according to them. We're not even sure exactly what happened, though, because they're being very, very tight-lipped about it. The UN promises to investigate itself and presumptively find that there was no systemic wrongdoing whatsoever on that. It wasn't our fault. It's just some bad apples. It's not a rotten barrel. It's just some rotten apples happen to be inside of it. Stationing nukes in the UK shouldn't be necessary. It's not doomsday. It's not World War III brinksmanship, but it's still ominous. That the idea of letting Western weapons be used against, like, Moscow or St. Petersburg is just short of batshit. That's about all. Peace out.